So again, just talking a little bit about some considerations. So basic formatting such as fonts, paragraphs, and tables. So here's some examples of some good fonts. We have Arial, Century Gothic, Helvetica, a couple other ones kicking around there. And then of course on this side here I have more or less not as good. Such things as Times New Roman, Bookman Old Style, nice calligraphy one. Please don't, not even. And I just actually I was on a call a little while ago and somebody kind of brought up the fact, and this was like there was some advising for students and recommended using Times New Roman because that's what we're all accustomed to. But I think this is a very, I'm going to say, kind of a dated font. I mean, this used to be like the default in Word years ago. So sure, there's quite a few of us that kind of came up using such a font. But one of the issues that people can have kind of from a processing point of view or readability point of view is this type of font has little tickies on it. That's why these are called sans serifs, because they have no serifs. So they don't have the little wings or little kind of curves. They're more of a flat font that make the readability easier, easier for someone to process while reading. So even kind of comparing these things, you'll probably notice that the fonts on the left are a little bit easier on the eyes. So keep that in mind. Also consider color contrast, whether it's which, if you take a look at these, which one's easier to read. I assume it's the one on the right. It's very clear. The one on the left, there's a bit of blending there, so keep your color contrast in mind. There's a lot of good tools out there if you kind of run some of your stuff through to kind of find out if it kind of passes the accessibility kind of smell test, if you will. It will kind of help identify if your color schemes are difficult to digest. When considering such things and kind of getting into some paragraph formatting, quite often we use bullets and we use numbered lists. So when would you use one over the other? So I've got two lists here. I like to bird. I do it on the weekend. Buffleheads are exciting. I actually saw a few this weekend. Or earlier in the week, I can't remember, but I did see some buffleheads, which was kind of exciting. So they're back. They actually migrate here in the fall and winter, and then leave in the spring and summer. And please don't eat them. And I have the same list on the right-hand side. It's numbered. So you might look at it and say, well, okay, I don't see too much of a difference. But typically, especially when you're dealing with something like a screen reader, is going to come and it's going to basically read these pieces of information. And if it's a numbered list, it kind of puts a priority on things, or maybe it's a series of steps. So it could potentially confuse somebody who's using assistive technology. So typically you're going to want to use numbered lists when you're sequencing things, when you're kind of providing a list. Here's a series of steps. But if it's if the list is not important, for instance, I could shuffle these three pieces of information, and it wouldn't really make a difference except for the way I laid out. Please don't eat them. But really, there's no priority or no sequence involved. So here's a really good example of some bullets that were used, and I see this quite often. People kind of grab information and they throw it into something like Brightspace, and they apply bullets, and because of the way the formatting is set up, it all of a sudden kind of staggers the information because the alignment's not correct. So it's always a good idea to do a bit of research. If this is something that you kind of struggle with, there's a lot of probably good videos out there on YouTube on how to properly set up hanging indents or readjust your tab settings to make sure that this information is lined up. I'd also say that probably in this situation, there's probably a little too much information there, but that's just me. One thing I probably should have mentioned back when I was talking about fonts was the fact that you probably want to have a half decent size font, and that's there are some guidelines, like a 12-point font is probably as low as you want to go. Sometimes it depends on the font that you choose, and 12 all of a sudden becomes a little small, so you might need to bump that up to 13, 14. But quite often you'll have like a 12-point font for the body, and maybe if it's style or a heading interval, you might have that at 14. Anyway, tables. Like here's an example of a table that has a few issues. And kind of, and again, kind of going from how someone might process this while reading it, or process it, or a screen reader might process it. Like I have and these are instructions for bufflehead soup, even though I said don't eat them. So here's a situation where I have, realistically, if I was to build a proper table, I would want it to be consistent. So I'd want the number of rows and columns to be consistent. That way the headers for each of these, the column rows, are matching up. So right now I've got the amount, and that works for the first three, and then I've got ingredients and instructions that are combined together, so that no longer matches what's kind of kicking around over here. So it's always good to make sure that you've got the column headers in place. If this information is going to span over a separate page, make sure that you turn on like a rows to repeat at top type feature. That way a screen reader will continue to identify that. Use the table feature in Word or Excel, because it puts on parameters for screen readers to identify kind of the indexing of things, if you will. And if at all possible, do not merge or split cells or tables, just because, like in a situation here, if a screen reader is to go through, the information is no longer consistent. There's not a consistent pattern for the screen reader to kind of feed that information back. So those are just a few things you may or may not be aware of. And I think that's about it. I think the next one is going to be on image considerations, as I obviously bounce to the next slide, but that will do it.